A man who had rebuilt his life after years lost to addiction and incarceration found himself seated across from a daytime talk show host who believed she held the moral high ground. What played out next became one of the most heated moments ever seen on live daytime television. He arrived expecting a routine conversation about music and personal growth, but instead walked straight into an on-air confrontation that caught everyone off guard. What followed was not a simple disagreement, but a clear example of how relentless judgment and arrogance can push even the calmest person to the edge. The studio was flooded with bright lights that Tuesday morning as Jelly Roll adjusted his dark button-down shirt and took his place in the familiar chair. The audience hummed with anticipation, filled with supporters who had followed his long and difficult journey from a troubled past to mainstream success. Moments earlier, Whoopi Goldberg had wrapped up the opening segment, and the atmosphere felt upbeat and welcoming. Jelly Roll-born Jason DeFord had been genuinely excited for the appearance. He saw it as an opportunity to discuss his latest music, his advocacy for criminal justice reform, and the hard-earned lessons that came from years of personal struggle. With a warm smile, Whoopi introduced him to the crowd, highlighting the contrast between time spent behind bars and his rise to the top of the charts. Applause filled the studio as Jelly Roll waved, his natural charm immediately connecting with the audience. He thanked the host sincerely, mentioning how surreal it felt to be sitting there after watching the show for so many years. His voice carried the familiar Southern tone that fans recognized instantly, steady and grounded. Sarah Haynes eased into the conversation with light questions about his music, collaborations, and touring plans. Jelly Roll responded with humility, emphasizing gratitude rather than success. He spoke openly about how music had given him purpose, how becoming a father forced him to confront his demons, and how he hoped to use his visibility to help people who felt trapped by their past. Leaning forward, he explained that many judge him at a glance because of his appearance and history, but real change comes from growth and accountability. The audience listened closely, visibly moved by his honesty. That sense of openness continued when Alyssa Farah Griffin asked about his work supporting criminal justice reform. His expression shifted with passion as he described programs designed to help former inmates re-enter society. He spoke from experience, describing the hopelessness that comes when people are defined solely by their worst mistakes. He emphasized that transformation is possible when someone is given support and a genuine second chance. Up to that point, the conversation had flowed smoothly, but then Joy Behar, who had been quietly observing with a tight smile, interjected. Longtime viewers recognized the look immediately, the one that signaled a provocative remark was coming. Her tone turned sharp as she dismissed his message as overly sentimental, pointing out his criminal past and time in prison. She questioned his credibility, suggesting that someone with his history had no authority to speak on rehabilitation or second chances. The room went still. The shift in energy was unmistakable as her words lingered in the air. Jelly Roll's expression changed, but he stayed composed, choosing his response carefully. He explained that his perspective came directly from lived experience, not theory, and that he never claimed to be an expert beyond his own story. Sharing that story, he said, was about preventing others from making the same mistakes. Joy pressed on, leaning back with visible confidence. She implied that his transformation only coincided with fame and financial success, hinting that his public image might be nothing more than a calculated strategy. Cameras caught Jelly Roll clenching his hands briefly before relaxing them again. The other hosts shifted uncomfortably, clearly sensing the tension rising. When he addressed her again, his voice was controlled but firm, carrying a clear edge. He made it known that this was not a branding exercise or a publicity move, but the reality of his life. The scars, the losses, and the effort it took to change were real, not scripted talking points. The studio remained silent, every eye fixed on him as the moment stretched, heavy with emotion and unresolved tension. Those memories were not abstract ideas or convenient anecdotes. They were lived moments that carved deep marks into who he had become. Still, Joy showed no sign of backing off. There was a sharp, almost predatory glint in her eyes, the kind that suggested she sensed vulnerability and intended to exploit it. She spoke as if his current success erased the past, implying that redemption was easy when accompanied by fame, money, and sold-out arenas. She emphasized the harm left behind, the people wounded, and the neighborhoods damaged by the world he once belonged to. Her words lingered heavily, filling the studio with an oppressive weight. The change in Jelly Roll was immediate and unmistakable. The calm presence that had defined him earlier gave way to something far more intense. His breathing grew heavier, his shoulders squared, and a visible fire sparked behind his eyes. It was clear to everyone watching that a line had been crossed. When he spoke again, his voice carried more force, rising with each word as emotion pushed its way to the surface. He spoke about accountability, about the years he had spent sober trying to make things right, about the daily effort to repair damage that could never fully be undone. He made it clear that his platform was not a shield but a responsibility. Joy continued, unmoved by the shift she had caused. She insisted that remorse did not undo loss, that apologies did not resurrect lives destroyed by addiction or restore families torn apart. She dismissed his efforts as insufficient, suggesting that music and public sentiment could not erase responsibility. That was the moment something finally broke. The restraint Jelly Roll had worked so hard to maintain cracked under the pressure of her relentless accusations. Years of discipline and self-control collided with a sense of being publicly stripped down and reduced to his worst past actions. He surged to his feet so suddenly that the chair rolled backward. His towering frame loomed over the desk as his voice thundered across the studio, raw and unfiltered. The southern edge in his accent thickened as emotion took control. He shouted that the weight of his past never left him, that guilt and awareness followed him every day. He made it clear that he lived with the consequences constantly, far from ignorant of the pain he had caused. The force of his words sent a shock through the room. Gasps rippled through the audience. Cameras scrambled to keep up, operators adjusting angles as producers debated whether to cut away. Whoopi Goldberg stared in disbelief, momentarily frozen. Sarah Haynes raised a hand to her mouth, eyes wide, while Alyssa Farah Griffin sat rigid, visibly stunned by the eruption unfolding in front of her. Joy, however, appeared almost satisfied. A smug smile tugged at her face as if the outburst confirmed what she had been waiting to prove. She gestured toward him, framing his anger as evidence, labeling it as the truth beneath his talk of change. She reduced him to a stereotype, implying that nothing had really changed except his appearance and circumstances. The studio, already quiet, sank into an even deeper silence. Jelly Roll stood there breathing heavily, his expression a volatile mix of rage, disbelief, and something darker. When he spoke again, his voice dropped low, controlled, and far more unsettling than the shouting had been. He leaned forward, hands planted firmly on the desk, and described the reality she seemed determined to ignore. He spoke about long nights in a jail cell, replaying every mistake, every person harmed, every ripple of destruction. He described memories that haunted his sleep, faces of young people lost to overdoses, funerals of friends who never escaped the life he barely survived. Joy attempted to interject, but his words cut through her interruption with precision. He made it clear that this confrontation was exactly what she had pushed for, and now she would have to hear it. He accused her of sitting in judgment from a place of comfort, disconnected from the kind of suffering he had endured. He challenged the ease with which she dismissed redemption, suggesting that only someone who had never needed it could see it as a performance rather than a necessity. The camera closed in on Joy's face, capturing a subtle but significant change. For the first time since the clash began, her confidence faltered. The smugness faded, replaced by visible discomfort as she realized the situation was no longer under her control. She tried to reframe her comments as accountability, her voice noticeably weaker than before, lacking the sharp certainty it once carried. Jelly Roll responded with a bitter laugh devoid of humor. He spoke about accountability as something deeply personal, something he enforced on himself every single day without applause or validation. He emphasized that accountability did not come from televised judgment but from relentless self-reflection, sacrifice, and the ongoing effort to live differently than before. He spoke about the work he did quietly, away from cameras and applause. He explained how he partnered with organizations that helped people break free from addiction, how he walked into prisons to speak with young inmates who were repeating the same destructive patterns he once followed. He described donating money to families shattered by overdose losses, not for recognition, but because he understood their pain. Then his focus sharpened, locking directly onto Joy as he asked what she personally did to improve the world beyond publicly tearing people apart. The tension in the room spiked instantly. Whoopi Goldberg finally stepped in, attempting to restore order and regain control of the spiraling conversation. Her voice carried authority, but it was clear the moment had already slipped beyond moderation. Jelly Roll barely acknowledged the interruption. His attention never left Joy, and the intensity in his posture made it clear he was far from finished. He spoke about the difference between them, emphasizing that he admitted his failures openly and carried ownership for every wrong choice he had made. He accused her of hiding behind a mask of moral superiority, presenting herself as above everyone else while using her platform to belittle others. He labeled her not as a truth seeker, but as a bully armed with a microphone. Joy's face flushed, the color rising quickly. It was no longer embarrassment but anger. She snapped back, demanding how he dared to call her a bully and asserting that she was simply a journalist asking valid questions. Before she could finish, Jelly Roll cut her off, his voice swelling again with force. He accused her of framing the narrative to suggest that people with criminal pasts were incapable of real change, that once someone fell, they should remain silent forever. He argued that she was not questioning him honestly but pushing an agenda designed to make others feel small so she could feel superior. The other hosts glanced back and forth between them, visibly unsure whether to intervene or allow the confrontation to unfold. Sarah Haynes looked tense, clearly searching for the right moment to de-escalate. The audience, however, sat in complete silence, captivated by the raw emotion radiating from the exchange. Joy fired back, her voice growing louder and more defensive as she claimed years of experience interviewing people like him. She insisted she could easily tell authentic rehabilitation from rehearsed storytelling, accusing him of learning how to say the right things to distract from who he truly was. That accusation landed hard. Jelly Roll's expression shifted rapidly, pain flickering across his face before transforming into anger, and finally settling into something closer to pity. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, controlled, yet far more powerful than his earlier shouting. He explained that what he truly was went far beyond labels or public perception. He described himself as a father striving every day to become someone his daughter could admire. He spoke of knowing rock bottom intimately and fighting his way upward daily. He identified himself as a flawed human being who made devastating choices and now spent his life trying to repair what he could. He paused deliberately, letting the silence stretch as his words sank into the room. Then he turned the focus back onto Joy, stating that what she truly was amounted to someone paid to tear others down for entertainment. He accused her of confusing cruelty with intelligence, never having to fight for genuine survival or redemption in her own life. Because of that, he argued, she lacked the ability to recognize what real change looked like. Joy tried to respond, opening her mouth to reclaim control, but Jelly Roll raised his hand sharply, stopping her. He told her he wasn't finished. He shifted the conversation toward accountability again, but this time aimed it squarely at her. He questioned how many people she had discouraged from seeking help by convincing them society would never forgive their past. He asked how many second chances she had crushed with her cynicism, how many families remained divided because voices like hers insisted people were incapable of transformation. The questions hovered in the air like accusations, and Joy's expression revealed they struck deeper than she expected. The confident aggressor from earlier was gone, replaced by someone visibly unsettled, realizing she may have provoked the wrong person. Jelly Roll continued, his tone now heavy with disappointment rather than rage. He told her she believed she was exposing a fraud, but in reality, she was revealing her own character to everyone watching. He accused her of preferring destruction over contribution, of tearing down others instead of building anything meaningful herself. Sarah Haynes attempted to interject with a calm, diplomatic remark, but neither Joy nor Jelly Roll acknowledged her. The exchange had moved far beyond a television segment. It had become a collision of two fundamentally opposing worldviews, two interpretations of human nature, responsibility and redemption. Joy insisted she stood by everything she had said, though her voice trembled as she defended skepticism toward public transformations. Jelly Roll slowly shook his head, and when he looked at her, his expression carried something close to sadness. He remarked that the true tragedy was the wasted opportunity. They could have used the moment to discuss addiction honestly, to address criminal justice reform, to explore ways society could help people rebuild their lives. Instead, he said she chose cruelty not for truth but for entertainment. The weight of his words settled over the studio, heavy and unavoidable, leaving the room wrapped in a silence that felt impossible to escape. For a brief second, even Joy seemed to weigh his words, her expression shifting as if something had landed. Then instinct took over. She straightened in her chair, shoulders back, defensiveness returning in full force. She snapped that she didn't need lectures about entertainment, insisting this was journalism, that her role was to ask the hard questions others avoided. If someone couldn't tolerate scrutiny, she said, perhaps they didn't belong in the public spotlight at all. Jelly Roll let out a short, hollow laugh that carried no humor. He said that if those were tough questions, then he had a few of his own. He challenged her credibility, pointing out how rarely she ever admitted being wrong, how seldom she showed real empathy toward people who had failed. He questioned when she had last used her platform to lift someone up instead of cutting them down. The shift was immediate. Joy's mouth moved, opening and closing, but no words came out. She had not expected the focus to turn so sharply onto her, and it showed as she struggled to regain control of a conversation that had slipped beyond her grasp. Jelly Roll pressed on, his voice growing stronger with every sentence. He accused her of being able to criticize endlessly but bristling the moment her own character was examined. Attacking others came easily, he said, but self-reflection was treated as unfair when directed at her. At that point, Whoopi Goldberg tried again to step in, signaling that things needed to slow down. Jelly Roll turned toward her respectfully but firmly, acknowledging her effort while insisting the moment demanded honesty. He explained that he had arrived in good faith, hoping to talk about music, redemption, and growth, maybe even to inspire someone watching. Instead, he said, he felt ambushed by someone who had already decided he was a fraud before he ever spoke. He turned back toward Joy Behar, his tone dropping, quieter yet more intense. He said the most disappointing part of the entire exchange was the missed opportunity. She could have been part of something constructive, could have asked about the programs he supported, the young people he mentored, the real difficult work happening behind the scenes to help lives change. Instead, he said she chose cruelty. Joy immediately objected, denying the accusation, but the protest barely registered. Jelly Roll's restraint finally gave way again. His voice rose sharply as he demanded to know what exactly he was being punished for. For getting sober. For rebuilding his life. For trying to keep others from repeating his mistakes. He said the only real offense seemed to be that his past made her uncomfortable. The studio crackled with tension. Cameras captured audience members frozen in disbelief, hands covering mouths, eyes wide. In the control room, producers scrambled, unsure whether they were witnessing a catastrophic breakdown or the most gripping live television they had ever recorded. Joy fired back, regaining some volume, accusing him of profiting from a redemption narrative while real people continued to suffer from the consequences of his past actions. That word hit him hard. His voice fractured with emotion as he rejected the idea outright. He said every dollar he earned came with the constant knowledge that it had to be deserved again and again. He spoke of families who lost loved ones because of choices he made, of the weight that followed him into every success. Fame, he said, did not bring restful sleep or erase memory. He leaned forward over the desk, closed now, his voice raw and exposed. He talked about giving away more money than many people earned in a year to organizations helping addicts recover. He described spending his free time inside prisons, talking to kids who reminded him painfully of his younger self. He explained that he used every opportunity he had to tell people change was possible if they were willing to do the work. His platform, he said, was something he fought for, not something handed to him. Joy tried to interrupt, but his voice rolled over hers, unstoppable. He told her she didn't want to hear any of it, because it didn't fit the story she had already written in her mind. No matter what evidence stood in front of her, she had already decided who he was. She scoffed in response, dismissing his efforts as minimal gestures, suggesting donations and prison visits could never outweigh his past. The words struck like a bolt of electricity. Jelly Roll slowly straightened, and when he looked at her again, something had changed. The anger had drained away, replaced by something heavier, more profound. He spoke softly now, saying that nothing could erase what he had done, nothing could bring back the dead, undo broken families, or repair every community harmed by his choices. He said there was no escaping that truth. His voice grew steadier as he finished, explaining that this reality followed him every day of his life, shaping every decision, every step forward. The studio remained locked in silence as the weight of his words settled over everyone present, thick and unavoidable. What followed no longer carried the heat of angry shouting. The tone had shifted into something far heavier, drawn from a place much deeper than rage. His voice was steady now, controlled, shaped by reflection rather than fury. What he explained was not a defense built on excuses, but an acknowledgement of reality. At the core of everything being thrown at him was a single idea. Whether someone like him deserved forgiveness. Whether redemption was even allowed for people with a past like his. Whether moving forward and attempting to make things right was something society would ever permit. He slowly looked around the studio, meeting the eyes of the other hosts, the silent audience, even the camera operator standing frozen in place. Then he spoke with quiet certainty. He admitted he did not know whether he deserved forgiveness. He said that decision was not his to make. What he did know, without hesitation, was that he would spend the rest of his life trying to earn it through his actions, his choices, and the way he treated others moving forward. Joy Behar opened her mouth as if to respond, but he raised his hand once more, not aggressively but with finality. He said judgment was acceptable if it came from observing what he did next. He invited people to judge him by the lives he helped protect, by the young people he guided away from the same destructive road he once traveled, and by the families he worked to support and heal. He made it clear that the past could not be changed, but the future was still being written. He asked to be measured not by who he had been, but by who he was becoming. The silence that followed was overwhelming. It pressed down on the room so heavily that even small movements felt out of place. For a brief moment, Joy appeared unable to speak at all. The cameras caught her expression, and there was something unfamiliar there, something that resembled discomfort, perhaps even shame. His honesty had cut through the noise in a way no argument could. He continued, his voice calm and unwavering. He said she had come into the conversation believing she would expose a fraud, someone hiding behind carefully chosen words. Instead, what had been revealed was her own refusal to believe in change. He spoke about cynicism, about the need some people had to tear others down in order to feel superior. He adjusted his shirt, straightened himself, and looked directly into the camera. He addressed those watching who were struggling with addiction, those burdened by mistakes they believed were unforgivable, those who had been told they would never be more than their worst moment. He told them change was possible. He acknowledged it was difficult and slow, not something that happened overnight, but insisted it was real and attainable. He urged them not to let anyone convince them otherwise. Joy made one last attempt to regain control, dismissing his words as overly dramatic. He cut her off immediately, his patience finally exhausted. He said she had attacked his character, questioned his motives, dismissed his redemption, and challenged his right to speak about his own lived experience. He pointed out that she had attempted to tear him down on national television not for truth, but for spectacle. When he defended himself and demonstrated what accountability truly looked like, she labeled it drama. He shook his head in visible disgust. He told her plainly that voices like hers made it harder for people to seek help, that attitudes like hers kept families divided and communities broken. He stated clearly that the problem was not people trying to change, but those unwilling to believe change was possible. With that, he turned away from her entirely and addressed Whoopi Goldberg directly. He thanked her for having him on the show and apologized that the conversation had taken such a turn. He made it clear, however, that he would not apologize for defending himself against hostility rooted in prejudice rather than understanding. The camera returned to Joy one final time as he prepared to leave. Her expression had shifted completely. She no longer appeared confident or confrontational, but smaller somehow, like someone beginning to realize the weight of a serious mistake. She called out to him as he walked away, but he did not turn back. He said calmly that the conversation was over. He explained that he had come to talk about hope and redemption, and she had turned it into an attack. That responsibility, he said, belonged to her. As he exited the set, the audience remained frozen in stunned silence. The other hosts sat motionless, clearly struggling to process what had just unfolded in front of them. Joy remained alone at the desk, visibly shaken, no longer commanding the room as she had at the beginning. She looked like someone who had just learned a difficult lesson about the power of words and the consequences of pushing someone beyond their limit. What began as a standard daytime interview had transformed into something far more significant. It became a collision between two opposing views of humanity, forgiveness and accountability. One side believed people were forever defined by their worst actions. The other believed growth, responsibility, and redemption were possible through sustained effort and honesty. By the time the studio lights dimmed, it was unmistakably clear to everyone present which message had carried the greater weight.